Assalamu alaikum, brothers and sisters. As usual, I'm here in my studio doing this particular, what do I call it again? Oh, right, exclusive Quora episode. So there are actually several exclusive Quora episodes, and this particular one is going to be about essentially what I believe, anyway. This is my opinion, but I think practically it's the truth. Um, I'm here to talk about what the Orthodox Muslims should think about the whole situation with Israel. Before that, I have to just go ahead and get some business out of the way. If you have messaged me about something that hasn't been approved on Quora, usually it's because the answers are too short. Granted, with some people, I do allow them to have 3, 4 sentence answers, but I'm trying to stay away from that because on Quora, essentially those answers get collapsed because they're not long enough. So I find myself, when I'm doing answers, doing some filler, doing a little bit of exposition, if you will, and it makes it more interesting for the reader. The other thing I'm going to request, as always, is please do not write a block of text. I just almost reject that immediately. I have messaged some people who do that and said, hey, just fix this up. I will show you where to hit the enter key, whatever. I've even reformatted it for them, and I don't get anything. Lastly, I want you to know that I'm allowing anti-Islamics to post here now because I don't want us to be an echo chamber on all of these different groups on Quora. It's just this echo chamber, and there's no challenge to it. I will also be posting some of my own debates essentially on Quora as well. You've seen a few up there of just people who have asinine notions about Islam. So let's start from the beginning, which is a very good place to start. And I want to talk about both actually Sharia and Halakha law. Now, you are all Muslims who are listening to this. This is who this is oriented to. I assume some of you are newer Muslims, so why not? And I'll tell the rest of you what you already know. Sharia law is essentially divine law. A lot of it is directly in the Quran. Some of it comes from the Ahadith, and then others are just reasonings, essentially. So the most important Sharia law is, of course, the Sharia law in the Quran. So when we say, Qul huwallahu ahad, Allahu samad, lam yalid wa lam yulad, wa lam yakun lahu kufuwan ahad, that essentially establishes the oneness and, as we all know, the tawheed of Allah. And if you break that, you're breaking Sharia law because it's right there. Other basics of Sharia law in the Holy Quran are not eating pork. And then there's other things too where men, for example, can't wear gold jewelry. They can't wear purple garb, stuff like that. So there's all sorts of different things based on Hadith and then based on Quran and then reasoned out by scholars, right? By jurists, basically. And also by consensus. So those are the three basic ways that you can, shall we say, create or muse on Sharia law. So let's speak on what makes terrorism unorthodox, and then we're going to look at Hamas and see what they're doing and see if that if that jives with orthodoxy. So the Holy Quran says explicitly, and do not kill yourselves, for surely God is merciful to you. And do not throw yourselves into destruction. So those are instructions, those are commands from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that are saying, don't commit suicide. What do terrorists do? Say it with me. Commit suicide. Now, if you look into Islamic military jurisprudence, and there's a really decent article on Wikipedia that's a great place to start with all this, but eventually you should wind up reading all the different ahadith and you should read all of the different scholars and their thoughts on certain things. So, lawful warfare, and also for it to be jihad, it has to be lawful warfare too. Lawful warfare means fighting those who are actually combatants. It doesn't mean hurting civilians. So when suicide bombers blow themselves up, they have two problems. One, they're committing suicide. Two, they're killing civilians and not actual people. Right, or people, sorry, they're not killing actual military, right? So this all started with Mohammad Fahmideh during the Iraq-Iran war. And in that war, he became, in big quotes, a martyr of the Iranian government, basically, not of Islam. What he did was he climbed underneath an Iraqi tank, and he had explosives strapped to his back and blew himself up. I'm unsure of the details in terms of how much damage he did, but he was the poster child for any kind of suicide bombing, henceforth. So after the Iran incident happened, you have the embassy bombing in Lebanon, and then even before what we know now as 9/11, there was even an attack on the towers in the 80s back then. So really all this started around that time. And a lot of people blame Salafism. I am one of them. But the thing is the original position of Salafism was essentially orthodox. It was just socio too. It wasn't just religious. It was socio-orthodoxy, meaning it involved a society, because Salafism was originally just anti-colonialism, and that was essentially woven in to Islam. But the first people who fought against the Zionists did not have to blow themselves up. They fought legitimate warfare, at least insofar as I know. Incidentally, that's something that I hope you guys are doing. Please check me on things if something doesn't sound right. If you see me write something on Quora and have a question about it or want to question me, please do, because I'm trying to get you guys to do research, to think just the same way that I'm trying to get anti-Islamics to do research and think. Right, so this was the precedent, essentially, that was set by Mohammad Fahmideh, and up until today we have all of these suicide bombers. So Salafism kind of morphed from a political socio version of Islam that followed orthodoxy into something that obviously does not at all follow orthodoxy, at least in the mind of Orthodox Muslims. When we hear Salafism, generally, at least I equate it with terrorism, and I assume you guys do too. So that was where that kind of escalated, and that's very important to know this history. And you should research the Iran-Iraq War. You should research Mohammad Fahmideh and all that good stuff. Essentially, there are theories here in the United States that even back then, the Iraq-Iran war was just a covert war. So let's go over to Israel and Palestine now. There's something I found out recently. This whole argument that Zionists make, like, oh, there was never a land called Palestine, there was never such a thing as Palestine, and that is absolutely incorrect. So there is a thing called Palestina, and that was basically after the Romans defeated the Jews there in that land. They named it Palestina. So that's where the name comes from. In terms of like who needs to keep this land and all that other jazz, to me that's up for grabs, because just, like any other place, era of history, it's basically whoever has superior firepower gets the land. So I will concede that Israel, although it wasn't done, very nicely, they took over the land, and, just it is legitimate anyway. So let's go back to Sharia law. In Sharia law, we have established that you cannot commit suicide, that you cannot harm those, well, we say non-combatants when we speak of Islamic law, but you cannot harm those that are not fighting you. You cannot hurt civilians, basically. Yeah. Incidentally, you should check out Abu Bakr's, I believe there are 10 or 13 rules of warfare. I can't not remember. I haven't cited it in a while. But yes, you'll find that in the Wikipedia article on Islamic military jurisprudence. So in those rules, he essentially says, don't harm the flocks of of food. You can take what you need for your own food. Don't drain resources. Don't harm people that have something to do with monastic services. Don't kill women and children. I mean, it's pretty basic. And it says don't mutilate dead bodies, etc. So I don't know if you're making this connection yet, but Hamas has done all of these things. They have mutilated dead bodies. And incidentally, I also found out that when they took over Gaza in early 2000s, maybe it was 2007, I can't remember. So somewhere between 2006 and 2010, I would venture to guess. They actually assassinated their political opponents. So that in and of itself is, by Orthodox standard, an extrajudicial killing, and that defies Sharia law, just in and of itself. If they wanted to be open about, like if these were legitimate enemies of the state, or hiraba as we call them, put them on trial. They just went around assassinating them. It's very sad. So, right. So Hamas does all this stuff and it defies Sharia law. It's pretty basic. And I'm sure most of you are Orthodox Muslims and agree with me. So now let's take a look at Israel. Well, it happens to be that they have virtually the same law. There was a time, I believe it was the first Ramadan of the pandemic, when in conjunction with studying Islamic law and the Holy Quran, I also studied Halakha law, which is basically the Jewish version of Sharia law. And guess what? It's pretty much the same thing. Our religions are incredibly similar, especially when you compare Judaism or Islam to Christianity. And yeah, you can't kill non-combatants in Halakha law. So all those bombs that fall on those poor children are not halakhic bombs. And I think that the way to get out of this entire situation is for Zionists to follow halakha law and for the Muslims to follow Sharia law. Both sets of laws are revelations from Allah. So how could they be bad? They're going to prevent deaths that are occurring. And we need to do that. We should not be killing children. We should not be killing families. No side should be doing that. And it doesn't make it right that just because the Israelis came and did that 1948, it doesn't make it right for the Muslims to do it. And in this case, I use Hamas and Muslim incredibly loosely, because some of us, including myself, don't even consider them Muslims because they're not following Sharia law. So that should be your position, fellow Orthodox Muslims. If someone is defying Sharia law, point it out and say, look, they're not, at least say their actions are not Islamic. And same thing with the Zionists, their actions are not halakhic. Now, what's also very interesting is Israel is very Machiavellian. And I've seen a lot of questions here on Quora, and some of my friends who are not Muslims and not Jews have asked me, well, why doesn't Israel just go in there and take these guys out and be done with it? So it doesn't work that way when you have a state, and especially Zionism is dependent on protecting people. And if the Zionist government doesn't have someone to protect people from, what good is it? Right? This war, I mean, we call them wars like as a series of wars, but let's face it, this has not stopped since 1948. Nothing has changed other than borders. and in some cases tactics. As I said, the early Palestinians did not have to defy Sharia law to fight the Israelis. But what it's morphed into is basically tribalism. It has nothing to do with Judaism. It has nothing to do with Islam. It has to do with Machiavellianism on both sides. So if Hamas just was like, okay, fine, we're done, see you later, Israel, and if Hezbollah said the same thing, what good is Zionism? What good is the Zionist government? There's no immediate threat to their people. So losing that would be losing a political asset. And I'm sure most of you don't live in Palestine or Israel. And I want you to think about what I'm saying in relation to your own country. In the United States, communism was a scapegoat for quite some time. And I'm sure in your country there were other scapegoats where you just had this perpetual enemy, and that's because your government needs something to protect you from. So, same thing with Hamas. If Israel didn't exist, there's nobody to fight, right? The other thing, too, is Israel doesn't treat Palestinians well for a reason. They need them to be angry. They need them to be enemies. If all of a sudden Israel changed its ways, that may be a different story, I think anyway, especially by now, because this has just been ongoing, again, since 1948. So I would think that one or the other sides, if they made that gesture of just treating each other better, that maybe things would be better. But first and foremost, what they should do is follow the laws of Hashem, because they are righteous, and halakha law is indeed a revelation from Allah, as well as Sharia law. If we follow those precedents, we won't have all these civilian deaths, and we won't have these horrible things happening. I hope that in the end, both entities are just going to eat each other, and hopefully someone somewhere who is sane in that region will finally figure out that we have to do something different. Orthodox Muslims, be, what's the word I'm looking for? Be loud about this. You need to point out, especially to Westerners, because they just don't understand, that Orthodox Islam and Salafism, Wahhabism, I forget, I don't know what, I guess Iran is Salafist. Those things are not Orthodox Islam. And Orthodox Islam says no to killing innocent people, like civilians, says no to extrajudicial killings, says no to suicide. And same thing with halakha law. There's nothing saying that you should bomb or basically mass kill people, because you should only be fighting your enemy in both religions. So I hope this brings a little bit of reality for you guys to this situation. I know as Muslims you want to just support Hamas, Hezbollah, and I know the actions of Israel, they are no angels. But as Muslims, we need to call everybody out. We cannot let these people who are defying Islamic law define who we are. I am not a radical. I want to follow Orthodox Islamic law. And I want to shout that on the mountaintops. But it's hard, especially here in the States, where there's just so much propaganda against it, and people just don't do research. My own journey towards Islam did involve research, specifically on terrorism, which is why I'm so well versed in all this jazz. Thank you for watching. There are more Quora exclusive episodes for you to check out. There's a whole playlist. I will share it, and keep on trucking.